John is the CEO of Open the Books, and my producer, John, said you seemed to be Doge before Doge was even a thing, right?
Well, that's a great compliment. I love the setup there. That's a great clip. We at Open the Books, we're a transparency organization, and just the quick history is I worked for Senator Coburn for years.
Awesome, yes.
And I helped write and pass a bill called the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act that put all federal spending online for the first time in history. So that piece of legislation created a whole ecosystem of groups that empowered crowdsourced oversight. And Open the Books is one of the flagship organizations in the transparency space. And a lot of other individual entrepreneurs online have created accounts and ways to search government spending. And so what we've done really over the past 20 years since almost that bill was written is we've painted all these targets. So we've illuminated all of the examples of waste. And now Doge is coming in and going in and doing mostly precision strikes on a lot of those. So it's a very gratifying and exciting time to see them going to work on this. And it's going to be a very complicated, challenging process, but they're doing a tremendous job. And we're going to be continuing to identify examples of waste. And when they're done, the nature of history, as Thomas Jefferson said, is that government tends to grow while liberty diminishes, and there's a battle between the size of government and the scope of individual liberty. So we're going to be doing this long after Doge does what they do.
That's awesome. And Senator Coburn used to, as I remember, I know he passed away several years ago, but he used to illustrate this wasteful spending every year. I can't remember. I know Citizens Against Government Waste does like a pork list. Was it associated with that? Because he highlighted it every year. I remember that. Yeah.
We did something called the Waste Book in Coburn's office.
Right.
And he was a senator that went after the famous earmark called the Bridge to Nowhere.
Oh yeah,
and that was a bridge back in 2005. And that's a great story about the power of citizen activism, because we lost that vote in the Senate 82-15. So 67. We fell 67 votes short, but we won the vote by 82-15 among public opinion. And the American people were overwhelmingly disgusted by the Senate defending the special interest project. It was a bridge to an island of 50 people in Alaska, cost over $200 million, and the amendment would have shifted that money to repair a bridge that was just damaged by Hurricane Katrina. So the Senate voted to protect this corrupt earmark system, and that's what led to an earmark ban 5 years later, and that saved taxpayers over $140 billion. And it helped Congress sober up. And Congress actually cut spending in real terms on a year-to-year basis for the first time between 2012 and 2013, for the first time since the end of the Korean War. So, this shining light on waste through transparency makes a big difference. And we're seeing that unfold in a grander scale through Doge.
John Hart is here. He runs Open the Book. So if I were to go to the website, for example, I know that you have like 50 agencies that are, highlighted here, from the DOJ, Homeland Security. You can go in there and you can kind of cross-reference what kind of things they're spending money on.
Yeah, exactly. You can go and you can do a search. You can do keyword searches, search by salary. And then we do a lot of oversight reports. So we have one that's really interesting right now is if you go to something called the Federal Register, that lists all the agencies and sub-agencies of the government, and there are 441 of them. And what we're finding in this review of agencies, the first thing we discovered is that 75 are zombie agencies. In other words, they're still listed, and we pay this entity within the federal government to track all these agencies, but half of them, well, not half, but a good percentage are not even active. And
that makes you feel good, doesn't it?
Are getting money. Yeah, that doesn't make me feel great. Yeah, like who's watching, and it's an inventory issue. That's what's so alarming, is that any business that ran that way, they would go out of business because they wouldn't be able to track what they were spending money on. So it's really alarming. But then within the agencies that are getting money, there's been massive spikes in spending and relatively flatlined, employee numbers. Some of that's been outsourced to other NGOs and contractors. But we have a massive spending problem in this country. And, when we're spending more on interest payments on the national debt than we are on defense, that's a threat to our national security and our kids' futures.
Well, and as you know, John, the way that Washington does the math, and I highlighted this a little earlier this week, there was a Washington Post story on Monday, I think it was, about how Washington, D.C. might have these terrible cuts, John, because of what DOJ is doing and what the Republicans are doing. And they were being asked, this is horrible, and I hope people are not driving and they don't want to drive. They were actually being asked to make the unbelievable sacrifice of just simply going back to 2024 spending levels. But that was too difficult to do because that was deemed in the Washington Post and in D.C. swamp speak, that was a $1 billion cut. No other operation, human being, company operates this way. If you do, you go bankrupt, which is exactly what's happening to the country. But it's outrageous, the amount of spending that goes on.
Yeah, and we've known this is a problem for years. Back in the 1980s, President Reagan did the Grace Commission, and they found that 1 out of every 3 tax dollars was wasted. And it's important to think of this in the scope of history. This is a 100-year project by the progressive left to grow the administrative state. And with the exception of those 2 years I mentioned earlier, where we actually did cut spending, it's been a massive growth in the size and scope and power of government.
And you would agree that this is a bipartisan problem, right? This is not just Democrats.
Oh, absolutely.
Doing this. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So one of the things you highlighted here, I think this is interesting. You kind of referred to it, John, but the spending at some of the agencies that we're maybe even talking about here, like USAID, where the staffing grew by a certain percentage, which I think you indicated wasn't completely unreasonable, but the spending was way off the charts higher.
Mm-hmm, that's right. Yeah, for example, Department of Education, I think the spending was up 750%. FEMA, there was a big growth in staff, 290%, but 2,000% increase in spending. And so that's unsustainable. And we can't continue to go on without examining and really thinking clearly about what are we spending this money on, and what's the value for taxpayers.
Yeah, what's the return? That is an important question. The ROI.
Right. And this is a dirty job. I'm a big fan of micro, and if you really want to cut spending effectively, you have to be willing to get on your hands and knees and pull the weeds. You can't just mow the flower bed and say you've done the job. You've got to really understand where the waste is and go and get it out. And, DOJ and the team of technologists they have are certainly equipped to do that.
So I want you to talk about NASA here, because one of the things you do at Open the Books is you mentioned investigations. One of the investigations that you just revealed was from NASA, and this relates to some of the DEI nonsense that's going on, right?
Yeah, this is a really crazy one. So there's an issue right now with these astronauts stranded.
Yeah,
you people probably heard about, and sadly the launch just got delayed again. But,
right, I heard that.
But they're going to be brought home hopefully. So NASA has a budget of about $25 billion, but we spent, I think it was $20 million on DEI related activities at NASA, and when you think about it, what does DEI and promoting anti-racism or gender-affirming agendas do to help NASA's mission? And
I have an answer. I have an answer for that. Nothing. Right. That would be my answer.
So, the way I put it is, Newtonian physics and atmospheric reentry, they do not care about anti-racism talks or gender affirmation. So NASA has a chance to take one small step toward fiscal responsibility and one giant leap toward common sense by getting DEI out of their programs.
Well, and let's hope so, because, I've been trying to highlight this with some guests over the course of several years. And that's why I think that there's so much confidence right now, because some of this is finally sunk in and they're going after it. And, one of the things I say about DEI is, and I can tell that there's news anchors like Aaron Burnett on CNN that have no idea what they're talking about. So don't trust me. Maybe don't trust you, John Hart. Go to the New York Times from the fall and the explosive investigative piece that they did on the University of Michigan exposing all that crap, where you even have people on that campus saying, yeah, it was a big waste of time and money.
Yeah, and it's very divisive because, look, our country is found on this idea, this revolutionary concept that our rights do not come from our gender, our ethnicity, our religion, our race. They come from natural law or nature's God. And that if you want to uphold individual dignity, we need to recover and reapply that founding tradition of human dignity and human worth. So all of these additions that we make to people's names, LGBT plus, whatever the latest acronym is, those are all subtractions to a person's value. that you have value just because you're you. You're a human being, I believe, created in the image of God, and that gives you value. It doesn't come from your affiliation to any ethnic group or identity. And so identity politics is by definition anti-American, and it's exacerbating whatever racial tensions are in the country.
There's zero doubt about that. Let me ask you one more question. You're John Hart, who is the CEO of Open the Books. One of the criticisms that is leveled mainly by the folks at CNN and the legacy media, but it is a talking point, and I'm sure you've heard it, is you're not really going after, and when I say you, they're talking about Congress or DOJ or whatever, but maybe the same criticism would be leveled against Open the Books. You're not really going after waste or fraud or abuse or anything like that. You're just going after spending that you don't like. That's what they keep saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say our answer to that is let's open the books together and find out.
Right.
Give people maximum insight into what government's doing, and then let people ask for more or less of it. And so transparency, and the founders wrote transparency into the Constitution because they knew it was a building block of a free society. It actually precedes the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. And, in the public square, transparency is like oxygen. You can't speak if you can't breathe. So you have to have oxygen and information in a public debate. So I would say, well, look, if you think, people want more of this, let's have more transparency and decide if the public wants more of it or not.
Absolutely. Hey,
so we're not cherry picking anything. Our mission is to get the information out there. And Coburn worked with a senator named Barack Obama to make this bill law. So if you don't like transparency, you can blame Barack Obama.
I like that.
And Tom Coburn.
Hey, let me ask one more question. I lied because I'm on the website right now. It's openthebooks.com. I see the NASA story up there. It looks like a lot of great information and resource for people if they want to check this out. And then toward the middle of the page, it says featured checkbooks. And it looks like you go into different states like Kansas, Louisiana. It doesn't look like Missouri, though, is covered on that. So you don't have all the states on there, right?
Well, yeah, that should be. That could just be a bug on the site, but yeah, we.
Oh, okay, it is on there.
We have information from. Yeah, we have information in incomplete form over most states. So that's also.
No, I missed it. It is here.
We've got not just federal but state and local data, and that's an incredibly powerful tool, and that allows us when there are things like the fires in Los Angeles. We're the organization that is able to put two and two together and identify what we're paying the fire chief in L.A. And we're able to detect all kinds of different patterns of spending across states. For example, the Qatar Foundation has infiltrated K through 12 schools with an agenda that's trying to teach and indoctrinate students and teachers into this idea that terrorism is morally relative, that it really just depends on your perspective. Yes,
yeah, that's a new one. I haven't heard that one yet.
That's the power of having data, is that it allows people to look at what government is doing, and then to decide in a free society if they want more or less of it.
Yeah. I think they're kind of deciding right now, but,
I think so too.
Yeah, it depends on, look, Quinnipiac has this poll. I don't know if you saw the poll from Quinnipiac today, but it's really stunning. I highlighted this earlier because I guess they were kind of trying to make the case that, some of the support for DOJ is really not there. But if you looked at the percentage of Republicans, 77% support. Now, this is weird because this is an incredible number. 96% of the Democrats were against it. 96%. I mean, I don't even know how that happens.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to the extent to which our media is polarized, and
yes,
people are getting people can choose their own kind of narrative. But here's what's really going to matter is that the reason President Trump was elected again is because people believed and they felt like they were better off under his administration than Joe Biden's, and I think in spite of the bumps that we're seeing right now in the economy, that if you can get the waste out of the government and you can reallocate those resources and let people keep more of their money, that's going to have an incredibly profound and powerful economic benefit. And if you make it difficult for agencies to throw up roadblocks like the EPA for new energy production, energy is the master resource that makes everything cheaper or more expensive. And so the energy policy is really unassailable. and it's going to do a lot of good. And sometimes those benefits can take months or longer to spread throughout the economy. But cutting spending is the best form of stimulus you can imagine.